Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bryan Norcross here with a Hurricane HQ&A to kick off. Well, it's not quite hurricane season 2026, but in the Atlantic coming up in just over 2 weeks, and tomorrow in the Eastern Pacific, the hurricane season starts there. And we're kicking off this year with a very special guest, my good friend for many years, the director now of the National Weather Service, Ken Graham. Ken, welcome to this HQ&A kind of experiment that we've been doing here the last couple of years, and people really like it, showing up on all these platforms, the platforms they're used to.
I love this. I love experiments, and Bryan, you and I go way back, so I'm excited to be able to do this with you.
Yeah, I know Ken from his time in the National Weather Service office for the New Orleans area. So for folks in hurricane land, Ken was a hurricane guy and, of course, director of the National Hurricane Center. So is very, knows everything about hurricanes, but also we're going to talk a lot about generally how the National Weather Service works across the United States and what's going on and the new things planned for the National Weather Service. So there's lots and lots to do. But before we do that, let's just take a look at what is going on in the Pacific, because we're going to have a lot of talk this year about the Pacific, and look at the water temperatures out here. Now, what we're looking at are the temperatures above normal. How far above normal is it? In other words, water temperature difference from average. And look at this area of extremely warm water kind of west of Mexico to south of Hawaii. And the ramifications of that are a couple of things. This is nothing to do with El Nino or La Nina. This is just a pool of very warm water. Because if we get a storm forming in here that goes in the direction of Hawaii, it's going to have more energy than it normally would if the waters were more like normal. That's the first thing. The other thing is that when you have all that extra energy out there, any kind of moisture that comes north has more moisture to pick up in the system that goes into the southwestern U.S. So more rain, heavier rain, more humidity, and so forth in the southwestern U.S. Is part of it. Then we have, separate from that along the equator, the question of whether we have an El Nino, and indeed the water is warming there, and the El Nino is likely. What an El Nino means is this: if this box here warms up, scientific research over many years tells us that the air rises there and it ends up descending over the Atlantic. When the air comes from above and down, that kind of squashes systems in the Atlantic. So it tends to lower the numbers of storms in the Atlantic and lower the stronger storms as well, make them not quite as strong. So that's the indication at this point. There is such a thing as a spring predictability barrier for El Nino in the Pacific, so we're going to kind of see, but there is a strong signal that we're going to get an El Nino out there. So here's the forecast from many of the models, and you see it takes it up near this 2-degree line. Now, things are a little different this year, and exactly what we're measuring it against, because now they average the temperatures around the tropics all the way around and compare it to that. So whether it is a super El Nino, which is not the technical name, the technical name is a very strong El Nino, or just a strong one, indications it's going to be a quite strong El Nino and having an effect likely on the Atlantic hurricane season. But we always say, of course, it only takes one. So here are the forecasts from an average of 17 different agencies, and we're talking about government agencies, universities, private companies, and so forth, all around the world. And here is what they say: just a little below average. 13 named storms, 6 hurricanes, 2 Category 3 and above. So that's the indication so far at this point in the hurricane season. But Ken, I know you've lived through El Nino years and you've lived through La Nina years, and you've seen hurricanes pretty much every year, right? Jordan in New York, can you hear Ken? So Jordan Overton is at New York headquarters, and he's kind of running the system there.
Yeah, Bryan, what do we always say? It only takes one.
Right, exactly, Ken. It only takes one. So we just want to remind everybody about that for, just as one example. We used the Hurricane Andrew example, but that wasn't actually technically an El Nino year. But in 1983, in Houston, there were only 4 named storms the entire year, and one happened to be a Category 3 hurricane going into the Galveston, Houston metropolitan area. So anyway, that's a big reminder about hurricane season. All right, Ken, let's talk about the National Weather Service and what you're up to these days. I saw you in January, and you were very enthusiastic about what's going on at the Weather Service after a tumultuous 2025 and the negative news coming out about staffing and challenges across the government and so forth. But you use the term, the National Weather Service is open for business. What do you mean?
Yeah, open for business. We're continuing the mission, performing the mission well across the country, Brian. But the other part is we're hiring, and that's a huge thing. So I mean, if you're watching this and you're a student getting out of college, we need you. So we've got vacancy announcements out there. We're hiring as fast as we can. The next generation of meteorologists. So it's exciting. It's really exciting to be able to get the new folks in here, get them trained up, and ready to go. So we're open for business as the mission continues. We're doing a great job across this country, no matter the hazard, and we're hiring. That's just great news.
So who are you looking for? What kind of skill set are you looking for? Because these days you have people that have more technical skills, people that have forecasting skills. It's not a meteorologist is not a meteorologist necessarily, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing how the profession of meteorology has changed. I mean, we still need the modelers. We still need the real science. The science is just still the backbone of everything that we do. But Brian, we need people that also could communicate, right? You can take hazard information, take probabilistic information, and communicate that to decision makers out there that have a tough job. I mean, they have to make decisions on evacuation, not evacuate resources, and none of that's easy. So if you think about the meteorologist, it's not just that science, it's being able to communicate the hazard, communicate that information to a decision maker. That's who we're looking for, the right balance between both of those skills.
When you say decision makers, you mean emergency managers for the most part, or the government officials responsible for ordering evacuations and so on? Are those your clients, or I guess you help out in anything where the public is potentially in danger, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's decision makers. It could be the public making the decision on a warning, but you think about an emergency manager that's making recommendations to an elected official to evacuate, or look at big evacuations statewide or small evacuations along a coastal barrier island. And these are huge decisions. So we want to make sure that we're able to communicate that risk, communicate truly what the dangers are, and the timing too. It's the arrival of that danger to make sure you're not behind the power curve when it comes to decisions, putting people in harm's way. So it's you think about Coast Guard, you think about Corps of Engineers, you think about emergency managers at every level, federal, state, local. You think about every across the board, across the country, where these tough decisions are made. We want to be there. We want to be there with the science, but not just the hardcore science, but also probabilities, right? The best case scenario, worst case scenario, the most likely scenario, give them options depending on the threshold. That's a whole category of information that a meteorologist has to convey. It's not just a hurricane or not just a tornado. It's what is that risk? And the risk is different depending on what you're actually looking at.
Yeah, this move toward probabilistic forecasts, I think, is challenging for a lot of people. It's challenging for us in the media too, because in the end, decisions have to be made, but different thresholds come into play for different people. At your time in the Weather Service, Ken, have you ever seen technology move this fast?
Never. I mean, it is moving so fast when it comes to looking at modeling. You look at artificial intelligence, you look at compute power. I mean, it is moving lightning fast, and which is a challenge. I mean, it's exciting because it could revolutionize meteorology, it could revolutionize modeling, but at the same time, Brian, I mean, it's hard to keep up with it, right? It's a training aspect of it's part of it, but also it's not easy to keep up for a government agency. because the traditional buy something and then use it for 5 or 10 years, then replace it. Those days are over. Things get obsolete really quick. So even in government, we have to pivot to that. Have to be able to think more nimble, flexible, mobile, and how we actually look at how we do business. And that's the forecasting, that's the science, that's the modeling, that's every aspect of what we do. But also, you and I, how many times, Brian, have we had this conversation? It's also how people get information, right? How people get information is changing from cell phones to internet to getting informations in new ways, that we're looking at through be adjusted because it's moving really quick.
Yeah, everything is changing so dramatically fast. Every aspect of it, not just the science of it and the modeling, but the communications components. And I can imagine trying to keep the organization moving at the rate of the technology has got to be one of your major tasks, no? Because when people are working hard every day and turning out forecasts, how do they pivot to this new thing that's coming along at this incredible rate, like a fire hose of new kinds of data, new ways to think about forecasts? It's crazy.
It's hard, and it's almost like you're getting to a mode where it's constant changing, right? So it's nothing sticks around for a long time. It's you think about computer systems, you think about artificial intelligence. Brian, I think we've only started to scratch the surface at using artificial intelligence when it comes to forecasting and meteorology. And it's interesting to look back at the 2025 hurricane season. Did you look at some of the stats? I mean, the artificial intelligence model, partnership with the National Weather Service and working with Google. It was interesting. That was the best model when it came to hurricane
Out of the
tracking
box,
2025.
yes.
But you know what's interesting? Yeah. But you know what's interesting is the fact that it was the worst when it came to intensity. So we had so many rapidly intensifying storms that there wasn't much of a history to really go back and look at those storms to be able to for the AI to keep up. So there's still more work to do. But what it tells me is that is the future, and we have to be able to adjust to that, going to the cloud and introducing artificial intelligence into everything that we do.
For you folks watching, if you have a question for Ken or for me, you can just send it in your chat, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube or LinkedIn or X or whatever you're on. If you send it, if you would put a Q colon in front of the question, it helps Jordan in New York know what's a question and what's a comment and what is somebody just saying hi. So talk about, I don't think folks really understand how the National Weather Service is structured. Everybody knows that is watching here today knows the National Hurricane Center, a part of the National Weather Service, but you have other centers for other things, and maybe they know the Severe Storms Center. But talk about that, and also then the local National Weather Service offices all over the country. And I know that a lot of the folks you're hiring, you need to put in those locations from one end of the country to the other.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you look at our agency and look, Brian, it's interesting. We have a internal briefing in the morning at 0900, and we go across the whole country and talk about all the hazards and everything from equipment to the actual weather, water itself. And it's humbling to look at this agency. So yeah, you think about, we have 123 weather forecast offices. Brian, did you pick up on that?
Yeah, 123. Yeah.
Not 122.
I knew that number, Ken, but yes, but it is amazing for folks at home, I'm sure.
But 123 is a brand new thing, because at 122 is what we've advertised for a long time. We have a brand new weather forecast office in Pongo, American Samoa. So we have 123 weather forecast offices, which is interesting. We have 13 river forecast centers. So if you look at those, our superpower in the weather service is local. Being in the communities, it's being able to be there with the decision makers. That's our superpower. That's where the expertise is. So your weather forecast office is where you get your tornado warnings, your severe thunderstorm warnings. It's where you get your flood warnings. It's where you get your forecast. Those are the folks, amazing folks, and that's where we are today. I'm actually at WFO, Baltimore, Washington, and it's just amazing to be here. The river forecast centers look at our rivers, but we have more than that. We have Interesting at 21 center weather service units, Brian, where we're actually co-located with the FAA. So the viewers and listeners today that fly either just amateur flights, just or commercial, whatever you do, as weather service people behind the scenes, looking at turbulence, looking at icing, looking at the weather safety associated with flight. That's a huge aspect of our mission. We have an aviation weather center that's located in Kansas City that issues an incredible amount of products for aviation, and there's more. We keep an eye on the sun for a living. Do you know, Brian, for the viewers, we have a unit in Boulder. What they do for a living is watch the sun. Remember how we tell people
Space
not
weather,
to
yeah.
the sun? Yeah. So we actually have a space weather center in Boulder, Colorado, and their job is to watch the sun to come up with when there's going to be, a solar flare or a sunspot that could impact the Earth. We issue warnings for that associated with those impacts, and those could be pretty big impacts in space weather. Tsunami warning centers. So for tsunamis, we've got 2 tsunami warning centers, one in Hawaii and one in Alaska, to be able to put out those warnings. Of course, you were saying, I mean, people know the Hurricane Center and know Storm Prediction Center. We also have the Weather Prediction Center, the ones that come up with the actual rainfall forecast, those amounts. And when you see the fronts all drawn on the weather map from the Weather Service, those folks are doing that incredible job. So, just across the board, it's amazing the things that we do from the Ocean Prediction Center as well, keeping an eye on the oceans. It's an incredible job. And we're also running the models. And one other statistic, you ready for this one, Brian? I don't know if I've ever put it this way to you in our conversations. The National Weather Service operates the largest radio network on Earth.
Yeah, I think I've heard that before. The No Weather Radio system is, extensive, almost the entire country. You can get the direct contact with the Weather Service on the No Weather Radio.
1,200 transmitters, Brian. So it's just amazing to look at the breadth of what this agency does, and it's the people of this agency that's behind this great mission. They're all on the front lines, using all the tools that they can to get the job done.
So Ken, I want to talk to you a lot about models, but let's go ahead and see what our viewers are asking about. Jordan in New York has been monitoring the feeds. Jordan?
Yeah, we've got a lot of great questions coming in from various topics. We'll get to them all, keep bringing them in, use that cue to identify it. The first one we have coming in here is from Phantoms Enterprise, talking a little about the Weather Service. I have experience as a storm spotter with NWS. I have some work on a degree for space operations and a minor in meteorology. Do I need a fully graduated degree to be considered to work at the Weather Service?
Ken?
Yeah, we have various positions. I mean, we've had electronics positions, we've got engineering positions. There's quite a few positions, but the federal requirement, it's called it's a 1340 series, and be able to Google it, look up that through OPM, the Office of Personnel Management. There are specific requirements associated with being able to get a meteorology job in the Weather Service. But by the way, a degree is not required, just the classes. So as long as you have that dynamics, as long as you have the math and the physics classes, you will qualify for that job. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a degree, but that education requirement has to be met.
Interesting. I didn't know that. All right, Jordan, what else you have?
All right, next question coming in here. We're going to talk about, can you talk about the new cone being used this year to reflect hurricane effects as it travels inland? This is from Marilyn on Facebook.
All right, so we have a lot of different things that kind of look like cones. So I think Marilyn might be talking about the wind speed probabilities that change, because she mentions inland, right? And we have different new cone ideas coming along. And so anyway, what's your response there, Ken?
Yeah, hi Marilyn. Yeah, Brian, I think what this is referencing is we've been working really hard to ensure that the cone properly represents the hazards. In other words, if you look at the actual hurricane cone, it is literally a cone of probability. In the cone is where we think the center is going to be 2/3 of the time. In other words, 1/3 of the time, it could be outside the cone. And by the way, you're going to have hazards hundreds of miles outside the cone.
I know where you're going, Ken. Yes, I think you're right.
I think that's what Marilyn means, Brian.
Keep going, yeah.
So I think what I'm excited about is this. Everybody has their own idea what the cone could be. You can't just go wild in changing the cone. You got to think this through from a social science perspective. So the new cone will actually have that probability, but we're going to include all the hazards, your your flood watches, your flood warnings, your even a tornado watch, all those other hazards, the winds that we look at, everything's going to be included on the map. So you'll be able to see a cone, but then you'll see the hazards inland well outside the cone. And you look at Hurricane Helene, you look at all these events, we lose more people inland in these storms than we do on the coast. So we've got to be able to represent the inland threat with every single one of these storms. So the new cone is going to do that. Maryland, give us feedback. Let us know how it goes. We want to make sure we serve everybody the best that we can, and we're trying to show those hazards inland.
You know, Ken, I've mentioned this to a lot of folks. I maybe mentioned it on here in the past, but when I first started doing the cone in the 90s, the idea of the cone was to only use it offshore. As soon as the watches and warnings were issued, we wouldn't use it. Now, I was in Miami, so I didn't, if the storm was going to the rest of Florida or something like that, you know, that was not my problem so much. So it kind of worked in that scenario. But that was the original idea, was for the cone to be a way to show the uncertainty offshore and then have the watches and warnings take over. So this is actually a new generation of that same idea, right? Is to focus on the areas that have a hazard, have a threat under a watch or a warning or whatever the alert is, and as opposed to exactly where the center is going to go, which really isn't important once those alerts are out.
Yeah, and you think about this. I mean, there's many cases that I go back in time. I can think of so many storms where the danger was greater inland than even on the coast in some cases, depending on the storm. So how do you portray that? Because it's easy for somebody to say, well, I don't know, I'm not on the coast. I'm 100 miles inland. Well, I don't have to worry about this, but yes, you do. So hopefully this map will really try to dictate and show what those hazards are inland. I hope it helps.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, we've been actually doing it on TV because our graphic systems would allow it for a long time to one degree or the other. But formalizing it and getting people used to it, I think, is really important. Jordan, what do you have?
Yeah, we have a lot of questions come in, especially from our TikTok audience. They're asking about the western United States and especially Hawaii. So they're hearing a lot about El Nino in the eastern Pacific. The season starts tomorrow. The specific question is, Bryan, could the El Nino bring another Inky for Hawaii?
Iniki, 1992, Hurricane Iniki was devastating in Kauai, and and that was not technically an El Nino year, but still 91 was the El Nino year, I guess, right? And it kind of was fading, so had some effects. And was the storm Iwa, I think, was the last significant hurricane. Well, then it was Joan and so forth later on, right? But yes, when there is an El Nino and all that warm water in the Pacific, there's a better chance, I guess, is all you can say. It doesn't mean you're going to get one, right? But it's a better chance.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Bryan. Look, the deal is when you have an El Nino like we're expecting, and the latest briefing I've had from our climate prediction center is there's growing confidence in that strong El Nino. So the biggest thing I could tell anybody in the Pacific is, I can't tell you if you're going to get a storm. I can't tell you the strength. I can't tell you what it's going to be. But I can tell you it's good to be prepared this season because there's probably a higher chance of having activity in the Pacific. So the biggest thing is to be ready just in case.
Yeah, and there's just a tremendous amount of warm water in the Pacific, not just related to the El Nino, as we saw on the maps earlier on. Jordan?
All right, next question coming in, a little bit about what you guys were just talking about. When will NOAA release the hurricane outlooks for this upcoming season?
That would be a week from today. Right?
A week from today, I will be there. We're having a news conference in Lakeland, Florida. Why Lakeland, Bryan? That's where our aviation operations center is. That's where our hurricane hunters are. So we will be probably in the hangar, more than likely. That's where I would pick to do it. But we'll release that a week from today in Lakeland, Florida, and we'll give out all the numbers. I will be there with my boss, the head of NOAA, Dr. Neil Jacobs. We'll all be there to release those numbers.
Yeah, I was just in Lakeland, as a matter of fact. What a fabulous facility that is, and an amazing team of people. I mean, it was a great trip we did there just about, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago or so. Anyway, it was... And you look at these old planes. These planes are 50 years old, and they look like they just came off. Just looking at the outside of it, look like they just came off the assembly line. I mean, they keep them in incredible shape. But just think what they face when they go out into a Hurricane Melissa or something like that.
Yeah, and Bryan, an interesting stat after the hurricane season. There a lot of times you won't even have paint on the propellers, so they get hit hard with the the winds, the rain, even hail in some of these storms pelt that plane. And so you have to repaint a lot of that plane, especially the propellers every season. They take a beating.
Yeah, but they look pristine. I'll tell you, it's amazing. All right, Jordan, what do you have?
All right, next question. This is from Team 7 Tech on YouTube. Are there any plans to update the hurricane category level to include additional factors such as rainfall, storm surge, storm speed, in addition to the wind speed?
All right, so this is an age-old question, including why isn't there a Category 6, Ken? I'm sure you have an answer that you've thought out for this, because we all, get it quite often. But it's a good question. I'm glad you asked it.
That's a great question. And look, believe me, we've toyed with all of these things ourselves too. So, we're even the Category 6 question. We're trying to get away from categories. If I could back up time, it would be nice to be able to get straight to the hazards, right? So, but the expectations to have the categories. There's been suggestions about having a category per hazard. A Category 1 for wind, but a Category 4 for storm surge. There's been a lot of suggestions like that. There's thought of putting the categories in with all the hazards, to consider all the hazards. But here's the problem, is the fact that we did consider that, but then all of a sudden you think about the hazard may be for a limited location. So your rain hazard isn't for everybody. So then you start pushing categories for hazards that only exist for small areas. We've never been able to come up with the 100% best solution. It is incredibly difficult to be able to do that, and I think that's why you see us. One, we got away from thinking about just having just the category. We have a separate storm surge warning, so we've got away from linking the category to storm surge, because, by the way, they're independent. I've seen Category 1s produce a 14-foot storm surge. I've seen Cat 4s that are small that don't produce much storm surge, and it's geographic based too. It depends on where you're on the coastline. So it's incredibly complicated. So our solution is this, and give us some feedback. Is let's get the cone. Let's display the hazards on the map, and that way you find out where you are, and some of your risk. That's been what we're trying so far. But there's no. You look at social science. You look at everything. That we've looked at from every different direction on this. There's no perfect solution to be able to communicate all the risk, but I think we're getting better and better by doing it the way we're doing it so far.
Yeah, the last 3 days, the World Meteorological Organization has had a workshop on probabilistic forecasting and how to communicate it. And this is meteorologists from all over the world, literally. And I was monitoring it, and they had these breakout sessions, and we were talking about it with people in the Philippines and people in Indonesia and China and some places in Asia. They're going to this idea of a green, orange, red, kind of a meteogram, kind of how bad is the storm surge going to be. But then somebody brought up the issue, well, it might not be too bad at the coast because the coast is elevated. And so what do you do then if you have an island out there that people are living on and that's not elevated? And for us, a 6-foot storm surge would be devastating for the island, but would be nothing for the coast. And what do you make that? Do you make that an orange or a red, or what do you do with that? So the reason that the categories are sticking as far as the wind, because the wind is based on what the storm is doing. The storm surge is based on the location. Nearby locations can have very different storm surge, and the rainfall is based on the location, on how much flooding you get. If you're at the bottom of a gully, you get a lot. If you're up the hill, you might not get so much. So that's also a distinction that makes a lot of difference. Ken, I know people are going to ask about models, so let's talk about models. So because obviously hurricane season is coming, we're going to talk about the Google model. We're going to talk about the European and the GFS and all of this. So what's going on with the GFS? Not that, it's not always terrible, but we've seen some bad forecasts from the GFS. And generally, I think people think that in terms of traditional models, the European is a better model than the American GFS. Just talking about that, and then we can talk about the AI issue kind of on top of that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting. There's always that debate. You always see it. You go to social media, and there's days of these conversations going on, and it is dependent on the event. I've seen I've seen events where the GFS is much better than European. I've seen
Right.
where they're almost equal. I've seen the European better. It goes back and forth. And I think
Mhm.
the other part that's interesting is what everybody sees is that one deterministic output when there's actually we're using ensembles, we're using multiple solutions. So our forecasts are actually blending together a whole bunch of solutions to get with that forecast, and the human is still beating the computers in that regard. So look, I think, but I do recognize this. So I don't want to come across as, hey, be careful. I don't want to sit here and just defend the GFS. I don't want to come across like that. But we are taking some big steps
Mhm.
now. So I hear the argument. Everyone's like, European is this, the GFS is this. So we're taking some big steps, Brian. So one thing that a lot of the viewers may not know is we had multiple physics packages in this country when it comes to running models. So we had an FV3 that we're using in the Weather Service, and there was another one physics package called an MPAS.
Right.
And as a result, I don't know, we're splitting our expertise. Does that make sense? So, the decision's been made that we're going to go to one physics package for the United States. That means universities can help us out with the modeling. The private sector can help us out with the modeling. We're all on one page when it comes to the modeling because that's what the Europeans do. The other part of it is this. We run a lot of models. And as a result, what happens is we try to support all these models, both from a funding standpoint and also expertise standpoint. So we have an environmental modeling center. They're incredible, by the way. They're in College Park. They're the ones that work on all the models. And if you think about the research that goes into the models from OAR, part of NOAA, the research into operations, we're running too many models. We're actually hanging on to models that haven't been updated since 2017. We're trying to run everything. As a result, I can't commit resources on looking at the GFS. I would love to see a day that the GFS is 3 kilometer or less global. I would love to see some of our short-term type models that are run hourly. We're implementing a new one called the Rapid Refresh Forecast System, RRFS. But to be able to get to these breakthroughs, you can't keep doing everything. So there's some controversial decisions that have to be made. You remember, Brian? Remember the old LFM? Remember, I could remember
Yeah.
NGM.
Right.
You know,
Sure.
these were fine at the time, but when new technology comes about, especially now with AI, you got to be able to focus the resources and the people on the next generation of models. So we're going that direction. We're looking at running models in the cloud. We're looking at being able to do things that we've never done before. So I'm really excited about the direction that we're going. There's a lot of talk out there about all of this, but in the end, I'm pretty excited. I think there's some big breakthroughs that are about to come. And one last thing, the next satellite, the priority for satellites, is making decisions on what those priorities should be. You look at imagery, of course, we want the imagery from satellite. The other thing that I want really bad is a sounder. I would love to see the number one input to make the models accurate ends up being a sounding. The balloons today, but tomorrow you look at how a satellite can do that to be able to get soundings, a profile of the atmosphere that are truly vertical, not blown by the wind like a balloon, everywhere, including over the oceans. You watch. That's going to be a big leap in model technology, and that's coming in the next 10 years.
Yeah, so if you improve the data going into even the existing models, you improve the model. So just to clarify some of the things, the physics package, what that means is the set of approximations and equations that describe how the atmosphere works, right? You can't describe every single thing, so you make approximations. So the various physics packages have kind of different approximations, and the idea of focusing on one, I think that when I heard you talking about that, I thought that was a fabulous idea. And if you can make the models have the global models that cover the whole Earth have lower and lower resolution, finer and finer resolution, then you don't need as many of these specialty models because you can do the job with that, right?
You're nailing it, and that's why tough decisions have to be made, and that's why I appreciate having Dr. Jacobs at the helm of NOAA and us having the conversations about where this is going. These are decisions that have to be made to make us the world's best, right? And I'm not advocating that we're not already. It's just saying that I think the models could be a lot better, and having these decisions being made and really focusing on fewer models and getting the physics package where we could get help. Think about universities working on better solutions for models and then testing that and then implementing that into our model. That's incredible. So this should revolutionize modeling, and especially when we go to the cloud and more fine resolution. I can't imagine. It's a lot of compute, by the way. If you have 3 kilometer resolution for the GFS Global, that is a ton of compute that's
Right.
needed. So we got to rethink how many we run and think about how we can do that in the cloud, because that's a lot of supercomputer.
And then of course you have AI. So can you see our feed here, by the way, Ken, where you are there in Sterling? Can you see it? So I want to show you something from Google going on right now. So this is a Google forecast for the Western Pacific. So there you see as of right now, and we look up here in the upper left and you see what the date is. So that's tomorrow, right? Nothing is the idea. Now let's go forward in time here. Here we go into next week. So there we are, Wednesday, still nothing. Okay. But then it's showing, and this is a track probability. So this is kind of a future cone, right? So this takes it through the end of next week. So now we're at 10 days from now, 9 days from now. And then we can go forward and you see another one forms behind it. And so, I mean, they're going out 15 days. Now, that's 1,000-member ensemble track probability cone. And of course they can do that because it's AI and it runs so efficiently. So, I mean, is there a tension about whether to put resources into this AI or, continue with the old way of running these equations and sucking up all this computer power to do that? I can imagine with the rate that AI is improving, and the fact that Google can do this and other people can do it, and I know that that NCEP is running a GFS AI model now, and the Europeans run AI models, and the Chinese run AI. I mean, there are AI models all over the place. What is that tension going forward, and how do you make that decision at this point?
Right now, I mean, things could change, of course, in the future. But right now, I think it's complementary. I don't see, at least for now, you got to teach the AI, and remember the AI model with the GFS was the best model in hurricane season 2025. I didn't say just the GFS. I didn't say just the AI. It was the fact that we're the only ones in the world, by the way, that are running an ensemble AI physics package approach. So if you think about it that way, it was combining the physics package with the AI that was the best model. But remember something. Remember, the AI was the worst model when it came to intensity, because you have to teach the AI model based on history. And if there's not a lot of history of these, look, Melissa, off the chart rapid intensification, if there's not a lot of historical connotation to be able to teach the model that, it's not going to get it right. So if you think about it, it's the combination, and the physics models are going to have to help teach the AI models. I see an approach that they run parallel. I see an approach that the physics package can teach the AI. And remember, the best forecast is the ensemble. It's not one single deterministic. The big trick that working at the Hurricane Center and working anywhere is looking at the ensemble, looking at the solutions, and doing blends of those for a couple reasons. One is more accurate, and the other one is you don't flip flop, because if you go from run to run, you'll all of a sudden you have a forecast that flip flops back and forth. You can't be evacuate, don't evacuate, evacuate, don't evacuate. You can't be doing that kind of thing. So it's an approach that is more consistent and it works. And I got to look up the stat. I got it somewhere, but the 4-day forecast in Hurricane Melissa was about 13 miles off.
Yeah, it's incredible. It was an incredible forecast. The introduction of the Google AI technology last year out of the box for it to be that good, and it did a really amazing job with Melissa. But it was the first time, and it's got ways to go. And this thing I showed you here, this kind of 15-day quasi cone. I mean, I don't know exactly what to do with that because we don't have history with it, in spite of the fact it's a 1,000-member ensemble. So anyway, there's just a lot. There's so much to learn. And going back to what we talked about in the beginning, how fast this is going, and trying to use it in a way that is supportive of the message and not confusing, it's a challenge for all of us, I think.
I think if you're a meteorologist, if you're the public watching today, or an emergency manager, I'm telling you, I was reflecting on it today from the Sterling office. It is here in DC. I don't know. It's almost like we're on the cusp of the next big transformation when it comes to modeling, right? You go back in time. It went from you go from the LFM. You look at models that we used to have that were limited fine mesh, these very limited physics packages that didn't even account for some of the vertical profile of the atmosphere, just the early onset of these and how sophisticated modeling has become. I'm telling you, I think there's going to be a rapid change, rapid transformation, rapid improvements as we go forward in modeling over the next decade. And I think even as a meteorologist, I think it's hard to fathom some of those improvements and what they're going to be. It's pretty exciting, honestly. So if you're a student, you're a new person coming into the Weather Service, a new person coming into meteorology, man, it is okay to be pumped up because I think it's an exciting time.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's a remarkable time. I've never seen not only this technology, but honestly, I've never seen the government, the National Hurricane Center, move so fast as to adopt these new technologies. It's incredible. All right, Jordan, let's go ahead and get questions we have coming in.
Yeah, another interesting question talking about modeling and other things. So for the NOAA forecast, I have a question from David. Very interesting. As far as predictions go, does NOAA refer to outside resources to influence the predictions, and which ones do they feel to hold most merit? So do you consider things like the Farmer's Almanac, or maybe even in the Sense of Hurricane Forecast, CSU? I got a question about that on TikTok. Do you guys look at those? Do they influence anything, or how does that process work?
That's interesting. Do forecasters that are looking at the seasonal forecast that's going to come out a week from now look at other people's forecasts? Or I think the answer is probably not. But go ahead, Ken.
The value is being independent, right? The value is getting an independent look at what that looks like. So no, they're going to look at their own data. They're going to look at everything. They're going to throw it out there as the NOAA forecast and see how it holds true across the board. I don't remember the latest statistics. Brian, do you remember? There's probably 40 or 50 plus different hurricane seasonal forecasts out there now. They're all over the place. So
yeah, well, I think last year was in the 30s. Well, there's a site, seasonal weather prediction, seasonal hurricane prediction.org, I think it is. But anyway, if you Google it, you'll find it, and it'll show you. And I just looked today, as a matter of fact, there were 17 that had been issued so far this year, and more coming, obviously.
So yeah, it's independent. And the other question about Farmer's Almanac, no, it literally is. We work with the models, we work with the expertise. Again, it's the human, the amazing workforce at the National Weather Service that, for me to be at the helm, to be honest with you, there's not a day goes by that I'm not completely humbled by that. That's the force behind our forecast. And look, just like anybody, meteorology is an interesting science. We're gonna nail most all of them. It's funny, Brian, how we don't really talk about the 99% of the forecasts that go well, but we sure talk about the 1% that don't go well. So it's kind of interesting. So, but yeah, it's not always perfect, but man, I'll tell you, with the modeling and the expertise, it's sure getting better. But we try to be independent.
Yeah, and but people look at the same kind of thing. The European Center puts out a seasonal projection, and that becomes part of the thinking. But it's not so much looking at the final forecast. All right, Jordan, what do you have?
Yeah, this one is more about this year in particular. This is a Train in Nature show on YouTube. Are there any similarities to the start of this season to 2023 with regards to SST anomaly at this point, which, if I remember correctly, ended up as a strong El Nino year?
Yeah, so it really depends on where you look at the SSTs, because yes, there are similarities in the Pacific, but in the Atlantic they are not, and the Atlantic is much cooler this year. So that was, I guess, the fair thing about 2023 was that the warmth of the Atlantic overwhelmed the El Nino signal. Would you describe it that way, Ken?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, look, you go back to 2023, you look at the off-the-chart SSTs in the Atlantic, go, man, this is historical. The logical thing is to think about, wow, warm temperatures in the Atlantic, it's going to be a bad hurricane season. But at the same time, it's really interesting to see how it overwhelms that signal. And also, there's other things that are created too. You could be so warm that there's actually a shear environment that takes place over the ocean as well. That actually makes
more energy in the atmosphere. Yeah,
exactly. So it's incredibly complicated. So the one big thing that I always reminded people when I was a director at the Hurricane Center, I still do it. There's no one parameter that goes into the seasonal forecast. There's no one parameter that makes the development of a hurricane successful. Does that make sense? So you're talking about ocean temperature. You're talking about, you got to have the right latitude, right? You can't be too close to the equator. There's things like that. Or you look at the shear. That's on a storm. You can have the warmest temperatures ever, but there's a lot of shear, you're not getting a storm. It could be the Saharan dust there's so many factors that go into development. It's all got to come together to get one of those big storms. So yeah, interesting question. I think you do see the warm temperatures in the Pacific, but that's pretty indicative of the El Nino. That's we're pretty confident it's going to form.
Yeah, and the fact that the Atlantic is closer to average, especially the tropical Atlantic, is relatively cool compared to what we've seen the last few years. So that's why you see the seasonal predictions that have come out be about the 30-year average, or maybe a little bit less than that, actually. So,
remember the reminder, Brian. Remember,
yes,
it's
yes.
I listened to our conversation, and I can see myself listening, going, "Whew, we're going to be
Yes,
okay."
exactly.
So I've been doing this almost 32 years in NOAA. So it just as a reminder to everybody, look, it could be the A storm, Andrew, whatever. It could be the A storm. You don't have to have a whole lot, but that one, even if you have that one storm, it's a pretty bad season for you. It's just a reminder of preparedness, no matter what the forecast is, no matter what El Nino, La Nina, sea surface temperatures, preparedness is everything.
And by the way, the Atlantic is always, the tropical Atlantic and the waters in the Gulf and the Caribbean, always plenty warm to support hurricanes, strong hurricanes. So the fact that they are not these record warm at those levels, then that doesn't really mean anything. There are hurricanes in years, lots of hurricanes in years with these water temperatures. All right, Jordan, what do you got?
All right, another question. This one is about Florida, kind of interesting. Hey, everyone's from Michaela. As for Florida, who lives in Tallahassee but who grew up in South Florida, how do I get people to understand that even a Cat 1 hurricane is very serious? People around here haven't seen one in a while.
Well, it hadn't been that long ago, but yeah, if you're young and you live in Tallahassee, although, I mean, but do you know off the top of your head, Michael in Tallahassee, what was, what were the winds in Tallahassee? Was that a 1, maybe a 2 at the most in Tallahassee? Did a lot of damage.
It was right on the outskirts of Tallahassee. So if you think about it, I remember this stat. I have to go look at it, Brian, but you were only 20, 30, 40, 50 miles away from getting catastrophic damage in Tallahassee. So
they went up through to Georgia, because up into Georgia, they had horrible damage. Yes.
Power outages through there. So the hard part here is Tallahassee was closer to the storm, but I mean, there's places in Georgia got that higher winds. But what's hard to always for folks to really realize after the fact, it's easy to say, well, that wasn't too bad, or we have some tree damage. You're messing around with little wiggles. Remember, I always said little wiggles matter. You have one jog to the right, 20, 30, 40 miles, and it would have put Tallahassee in a much more precarious situation. So that's part of it. But the other part is this, and to the viewer that put in the question, we have to remind everybody, it doesn't necessarily have to be that Cat 5 Michael. It doesn't have to be. I will tell you, Hurricane Isaac, I can talk about that one in Louisiana. There's no such thing as Hurricane Justa. we work with the WMO on all the hurricane names, and I will make sure that the J name will never be a Justa. It will never be a Hurricane Justa. So that was a Cat 1 moving at 2 to 3 miles an hour. That Cat 1 was big, and it created a 14-foot storm surge, 2 feet of rain, an incredible amount of tornadoes, all the above, and that was from a Category 1. This is why we're trying to bend away from the categories. This is why we're trying to say, look, the winds happen to be that, but here are the hazards. Look at the map. Look at the forecast. Everybody has to be able to peel another layer into it besides the category to see exactly what those hazards are.
Yeah, for anybody that lives in South Florida, and maybe actually the questioner there lived in South Florida, might remember Hurricane Wilma, which made landfall as a Category 3 on the southwest coast. But in Miami-Dade County, with all that incredible damage in Brickell Avenue in downtown Miami, that was a Category 1, right? In Miami-Dade. Category 2 in parts of Broward and Palm Beach County, but mostly Category 1 there too. So it just doesn't, it just depends on how long the wind blows and all kinds of other things. It's not just the number that counts, as Ken says. In fact,
and Brian, we didn't even introduce engineering in here either. So there's different building codes, there's different types of construction, And so that adds a whole nother layer of complexity onto this whole thing.
Exactly. And here in South Florida, where they're building 100-story buildings in downtown Miami, we've never seen a hurricane hit a city that is constructed as strongly as this one is, the new buildings anyway, but also what's going to happen with strong winds hitting those buildings and between those buildings and downstream effects and so forth. It's an entirely different situation than all the hurricanes in the past that have hit South Florida have ever.
The higher you go, the higher the winds. So there's lots of
yeah, there's a lot, right? Exactly.
There's something called the Bernoulli effect, that you're between the buildings.
Between the buildings, right? It's stronger the wind down. Exactly, and we saw that actually in Wilma as well. All right, Jordan.
Yeah, so everybody get your questions in. We've got about 10 more minutes left. We're going to stick on Florida for a second. This question coming in from Sissy Glock on Facebook. Can Southwest Florida, Tampa Bay expect a rainy season during this El Nino period? I do have a couple more questions or comments about how there's a lot of wildfires in Florida right now. It's very dry. Is this El Nino going to help with that at all?
Ken, you...
Yeah, there's an incredible drought. There's significant fires. I got briefed this morning. I saw the number of fires in Florida. So Florida's in a significant drought. So I think in an El Nino year, you start looking at that southern branch of how you can get some increased moisture. I did see like Arizona and New Mexico are going to have higher moisture once the monsoon season starts. But I think Florida could get some relief as soon as we start getting the rainy season going. Mm-hmm. So in my experience living in Miami, it was like a light bulb, wasn't it, Brian? It's like one day you're dry and the next day the rainy season started. It was amazing. So it's going to take a little bit of time and get into the summer. But once you might see some relief once you get into the rainy season. But in the meantime, we forecast some continue to some of that drought. So the fire threat's going to continue for a little while longer.
Yeah, the rainy season here nominally starts on the 15th of May. It's just as an average, but we've had dew points of 75, and the temperature right now is 90. Although drier air has come in, dew point is 68 right now. So it's when the dew point stays over 70, dew point being a measure of the moisture in the air. That's when we call it the rainy season. Okay, Jordan.
All right, next question coming in, talking about those 90-degree temperatures. I have a question here about, do they impact hurricanes? Let me find it. Here it is from Andrew on Facebook. Do hurricanes like 90-degree air temperatures?
Well, I don't know that. There was a stat. Paul Hebert, famous meteorologist at the National Weather Service in Miami, proposed the idea. I think it was Paul Hebert did the Hebert boxes of where the storms that hit South Florida come through. But did he do the in a dry May you're more likely to have a hurricane in Miami? Was that Paul or was that somebody else was that Paul?
I think Paul used to say that.
Yeah. Because statistically, when he did that, which would have been maybe in the 80s-ish, I guess, you could see that stat and you could kind of understand why, if more high pressure was over Florida, kept it drier, that would tend to drive the storms farther west, and if everything was continuous. But I don't know. I don't think the temperature of the air has much to do with anything. But when it's hot here, and then we generally have a flow that is bringing heat from the southwest. If it's extra hot, if it's into the 90s, we have kind of a southwest flow in the southern part of the state or on the east coast of the state, and that's conducive to bringing storms farther west if that were to continue. But
yeah, and I think part of it is, to be honest, I mean, again, living in Miami for the 4 years, I mean, you're going to be deep upper 80s to 90 almost every day, dew points 70s and 80s. So I think part of it is by the time you get to the peak of the hurricane season, those are pretty typical temperatures, seasonally, climatologically in those places anyway. So that's just a signal that we're just the warm part of the season, especially when you get into the late in the season, the August-September timeframe.
Yeah, when I moved to Miami in 1983, Ken, the warmest average high temperature at Miami International was 88. And the dew point in the summer was 74, 75. Now it's like 91 and it's more like 77, 78. It's amazing how the climate here has changed. All right, Jordan.
All right, next question coming in. This is about historical a little bit. Is this year's Atlantic hurricane season going to be rough as the 2005 and 2017 Atlantic hurricane season? I did get a few comments as well about is this going to be 2005 all over again? Obviously, 2005 a very memorable year for many.
Well, I think we can say with assurance it won't be 2005 because 2005 the Atlantic was extremely warm, and that was really the driver. And we did not have an El Nino in 2005 that would have affected things. So this is kind of the opposite, I guess you could say. But 2005 was super interesting in that the storms, all those important storms, the Katrina, Rita, Wilma, all formed way west and close to the U.S. and the Bahamas and so forth. So that was unusual. And this year, the water around Florida and so forth is plenty warm. It's very warm, as a matter of fact. So I don't know. I think we can say not 2005 for sure, but I don't know. But still, we don't need 3 big storms or 5 big storms to make it a big year.
Yeah, and I think the big thing to remind everybody again is you just got I always said, you said it too, Brian, you can't compare hurricanes. You can't compare hurricanes. You can't compare seasons. They're all different. Look, you even go back to last year. Brian, if you looked at this, if you would have moved, what if you moved the Bermuda High, I don't know, what do you think? 100, 200 miles to the west? Where would Melissa go?
Yeah, yes, it would have been here. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that could have been a South Florida storm. So you
Exactly,
start
yes.
doing some of the math. So
Right.
you got to be really careful looking at previous seasons. Now, what's working against us in having a 2005 or 2017? Look, the bottom line is having an El Nino in theory should lessen the number of storms that we have. But again, it goes back to this: you can have 1 or 2 storms. If you have one Melissa, and that's the only storm of the year and hits South Florida, it's going to be the worst season of your life, right? So you have to be really careful comparing these seasons. They're all completely different, and that's why it's always goes back to being ready for that storm no matter what. Keeping an eye on the latest information. Watch, listen to us at the Hurricane Center, the Weather Service. Watch Brian. Brian will be on the air doing this thing. So you start looking at this stuff. Preparedness is everything. You got to be ready. Whether it's 1 storm or 30 storms, you got to be ready.
Yeah, and the other thing is we've seen it the last few years where we end up with these gaps in the hurricane season where nothing happens because the weather pattern kind of kicks into a hostile mode for a while. It can also do the opposite. In 1992, the weather pattern was conducive to have a hurricane for about a week. And Andrew happened to take advantage of that for that one little period of time. And look what we ended up with. So it can work both ways. So that's why you never say, okay, there's no such thing as letting your guard down in this when you live in a hurricane zone.
I remember, Brian, it's interesting too. I've seen where you can have a bunch of cold fronts come through the summer season and turn them away from the coast. But I've also seen where those fronts will stall out in the Gulf and you get storms develop on that front. And then
Right,
you got problems.
exactly.
So it's incredibly complicated in how you can predict them from a seasonal perspective.
Exactly. All right, Jordan?
All right, our last question of the afternoon here, but I think it's a great one. This is from Casper on Facebook. 95% of hurricane season discussion focuses on before the storm. How do we educate and prepare people for the actuality of a post-storm environment?
Yeah, I think you have to live through a post-storm. It's really, really, really hard. But I know that you and the folks at the Hurricane Center have done a lot of work to emphasize this issue and start talking about power outages and talking about generators and talking about the hazards after the storm, before the storm happens, and to try and think this out.
Yeah, Hurricane Laura hitting over in southwest Louisiana. A big storm. I mean, this is a serious storm. We were predicting a 15 to 20 foot storm surge in places, and we verified around 17 to 18 feet. But here's the interesting part. So we got folks out because the storm surge and the advances that we have in the storm surge warning and so forth. We lost more people from improper use of generators than we did storm surge. An 18-foot storm surge. So I love your question. You saw me doing this is because yes. Love the question. I'm glad we're ending on that one. Generator usage. It's power lines down. This is blunt, but we have to be blunt. This is life and death. using a chainsaw for the first time in your life, right? You look at the statistics. If you don't have power, if you're on dialysis, if you don't have power and you have medical needs, remember, you may not have 911 after the storm. It takes a while to clear the debris to get you some help. So we have to continue. So all of us at the Weather Service and everybody watching, the media too, Brian, everybody, we've got to keep reminding everybody, just because the storm's passed doesn't mean you're out of danger.
Yeah, just imagine you're where you live, and imagine you had no power, no water, and no communications. All right, so what are you going to do? And here in South Florida, to me, this is a huge threat in high rises at the coast. Because the high rise is going to be there, and you can stay in an interior room in the high rise and be safe, and and you'll be alive after the hurricane goes by. But the streets are impassable because they're deep in sand and debris. You have no power, no water, and no communications, and you can't get out, and nobody knows what's going on with you. And imagine being stuck there, and how long is that going to take if you're on a barrier island? So, we could end up with untold number of people, and trying to get people to think about this ahead of time, I think is the daunting challenge of hurricane communications.
Brian, just the biggest thing too is people a lot of times won't evacuate because they think of the 500 or 800-mile trip and how brutal that is in traffic. Remember, know where you are, know where safety is, and if you don't know, ask. You may only have to go 50 or 100 miles inland to get out of the danger, right? So these are things that seem simple, but in the heat of the battle, we forget some of these things. And if you only have to go 50 miles to be safe, that might get you to evacuate more than if you think about the big long lines on the highways.
Yeah, the main thing is you have to think about it ahead of time so you're not thinking about it at the point of attack, so to speak. Ken Graham, old friend and great director of the National Weather Service, and we appreciate I know I speak for all of us at Fox Weather and every broadcaster I know, is that we really appreciate what you're doing at the Weather Service. And I can say, knowing a lot of Weather Service people over the years, that Ken has made this a great place to work. So if you're coming out of meteorology school and broadcasting, it's not what it used to be, and it's a whole different world in broadcasting, I can tell you. Well, it's Ken's making it as good as it can be at the National Weather Service, and you really ought to think about that. So Ken, thanks so much for being on our first Hurricane HQ&A this year. Really enjoyed seeing you, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for all you do.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. So that's our first Hurricane HQ&A of the 2026 hurricane season. Stay tuned to your social media, and we'll let you know when the next one is coming up. I know we're going to have Phil Klotzbach on just after he comes out with his forecast in early June. So we'll have that here, and we'll have your opportunity as well, of course, to ask Phil questions. And we'll be here throughout the hurricane season, 4 o'clock on Thursdays, as often as we can make it work for that time. That seems to be good for everybody. So anyway, we'll work on that. All right, everybody, be thinking about it. The best thing you can do at this point is make a plan mentally, physically first, but you start with mentally, right? What am I going to do if a hurricane is coming here? What am I going to do with myself and my family? What am I going to do with my property? And where am I going to get water to drink? Those are the top three things to be thinking about as you begin to plan.